Hey y'all, it's Elisha and welcome back to Elisha's Crafty Hoplop. Now I'm going to try to speak up because Lisa Douglas alerted me, and I know because P has told me to, that I am too soft-spoken. And I don't want to wear one of those little head mikey things. So I'm just going to have to speak up. And thank you, Lisa, for telling me. I appreciate it. I really do. I try to remember, but I'm actually naturally fairly soft-spoken. Odd, considering my personality, but true. Well, if you're new here, welcome. We hope you feel really comfortable. You've come here on a really interesting day. To my returning folks, I cannot wait to read your comments after this video. I want to thank Cynthia Aguilar very much. You actually gave me a gift without knowing that you were doing it. You see, in order to answer Cynthia's seemingly simple question, it's actually a really hard question to answer, and I'm going to endeavor to do it justice and my best. I got to go and look through everything you guys have sent me. Now, you know I have half here and half in Florida, but I, instead of adulting for part of my day, spent hours looking at your projects. One day, if I can figure out how to do the lighting, I will give you a tour of my other room, which is my art room and my office, where I have two displays up of all of your work. You saw I hauled that lit thing that holds up to 60 pieces, and I also have this other display set up. And I also have a vase with rosette wands in it, just like I do in Florida. But in order to answer your question, Cynthia, I wanted to actually go and pull examples because some of the categories are a little confusing without a visual reference. And I have tons of great visual references, thanks to all of you. So I spent a lot of time today in a rain shower of nostalgia and beauty and your work in order to find examples to help Cynthia and everyone else who is curious about this better understand these categories of crafting. Now, I put them in quotation marks because, I talk about the fact I'm not a clean crafter, and I am surely not a clean crafter. I struggle when I make embellishments for Alicia Love Letter Generation or Tennille Papermilkshake, who I just sent some to, or Ephemeris, who I just sent some to, or Susanalthaus. Then I work very hard at clean crafting, or when I'm working on half of Carmen swap pieces, and for me it's very difficult. But that is a style of crafting. What is a little confusing, I think, sometimes for newer people to YouTube is that people identify that way. So when we were doing the ATCs, for instance, Tami'sstampingtherapy says, I'm a clean crafter. My friend Katzelcreate will tell you she's a clean crafter. What does that mean? Well, this is where it gets a bit confusing. Because each category has subcategories. And then what do you do about people like myself or a few others I'm going to show you who do a bunch of different things and sometimes mix those so that it becomes confusing? Or what about people like Susantootsietucker and Craftymichelle that defy all categories? Well, that's what we're going to try to answer today. Let's start with the clean crafting, because I think in some ways that might be the easiest to answer. So people who identify as clean crafters, you'll note that all of their crafts are very elegant. They tend to be very elegant, what we might call simple. They don't have 50 layers. They aren't chunky. There isn't a ton of bling on it. You won't find a lot of lace, if any at all. You might find, like on Kathy's, a tiny little ribbon tied or a string, but you're not going to find a whole bunch of lace or ruffly trim or things that are tea stained or coffee stained or anything like that. It's often paper in its purest form, carefully, very, very precisely. This is why it is so difficult to do well. Precisely laid down and elegantly laid down. It's why we call it clean, is it doesn't have a lot of embellishing. So I'm going to show you, because there's also subcategories within that. So when I first started crafting, Cynthia, I mostly did Maggie crafting. Now, most, not all, but most Maggie crafters are clean crafters. So it's going to amaze you that that's where I started, especially because I can't do clean crafting very well, right? No wonder I struggled. But you see, I found my home here with Craftingwithliller. And y'all know that's where I got my start. And she is a clean crafter who does Maggie homes. And I like Maggie prints, as you all know. I love Maggie prints. So that is where I began. So that Maggie crafting is its own category within clean crafting. And then there's another subcategory. So Kathy, Katzelcreate, my friend, who you saw her beautiful cards last night, right? She's not a Maggie clean crafter. She sometimes does Maggie, but not so often. No, she's a clean crafter, period. Then there are crafters like Craftingwithliller, and she's a Maggie Holmes Allheart crafter. So is Tennille Papermilkshake. So is Elisha Love Letter Generation. Well, and we're going to talk about Aura after, because that one's not so simple either. And our very own Katzelcreate, she's a Maggie Holmes clean crafter. So what does that mean? What does this look like? Well, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways. All right, I guess we are going to Aura because I'm going to pull hers first. So Aura is a clean crafter who does Maggie Holmes Allheart crafting. And that is a subcategory of clean crafting. She's also within a subcategory of clean crafting because Aura does chunky dunks, or what we call chunky clean crafting. Here you go. So what makes this clean crafting versus, let's say, shabby or vintage, or put a bling on it, girly girl, or what I do, which is often a hoplop mess? Well, one of the things you're going to notice, I mean, the only real embellishment on this is this little tassel. You will find tassels in clean crafting. You'll see that these are little enameled hearts on the top. This is a shaker, and because this was for Christmas, she does have a glittery snowflake behind. But do you notice even though it's got, what did this have? 8 layers, Aura? I think this is one of your 8-layer ones that you sent me. And there's a little pom-pom embellishment. There's no lace, there's no distressing, there's no deckling, there's no staining. Gosh, shoot. I mean, if you asked Dara, your coffee stained something, she'd be like, have you lost your mind? No. It's the paper as it is, put together and coordinated very cleanly. Like, notice there's a very straight on focal point, even though it's chunky, right? All right, so that's one example of clean crafting. Here's Lou David's Memdex. That's another example of clean crafting. Yes, there's a little glitter, but notice it's the thicked up Memdex, a balloon, happy birthday, and a banner, and the present down below. But there's no lace. It's the paper as it is, simple, only a few elements carefully chosen, very elegantly put together, not a lot going on. Just an elegant piece of crafting. I'm doing my best, y'all, to explain it. See, it's not so simple, is it, to give it clean, like to give language to this. Okay, I'm going to show you another example. And I actually laughed when I saw a few of these. So this is another example of clean crafting. This one is by Nilda. Yes, it is. So notice again, right? So nice thick white cardstock, no distressing, no tearing, no staining. She has it matted with the city in the background. One simple, well-chosen piece. Okay, that's a little bit of a secret to the clean crafting. I'm not saying that they only ever use one element, but you will notice something. For instance, Craftykimchi. There's a great example. Elisha Love Letter Generation. When they do a tag, they'll have one piece of chipboard only to embellish it. One well-chosen, elegant piece. Me, I'm going to have like 15 things going on, right? And Aura, too, who does more chunky clean crafting, even though she has like 8 or 9 layers, notice it's one that's the central focal point. That's a bit of a clue about clean crafting. That's a bit of a clue. There's not 20 things going on. Craftykimchi and Elisha Love Letter Generation and Craftingwithliller, it's all about the layering and choosing very carefully one or two key elements and making those work. And if you remember Tami'sstampingtherapy's ATC that she made for me, she did put the deckled paper behind, but the shoes were the focal point. Remember? One really well chosen element. So that is that's really a secret to clean crafting. So, you know, I'm not saying that clean crafters never stain. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that they will never add some extra piece at some point. I'm explaining in very general terms because often clean crafters do have little threads. Like Ephemeris always uses beautiful, delicate little threads in what she makes. And so does Alice, Absolutelyalice. But she's also a bit complicated because she mixes clean Maggie crafting with vintage sometimes. So does Soleil. So that this is where it gets a bit complicated. But a trick is that for the most part, clean crafting doesn't have staining, doesn't have tattered angel sprayed all over it, doesn't have like deckled page ends. It's very clean. So it's very elegant. Usually only has one or two key elements. It will have an enamel dot or a liquid pearl maybe, or even it might be stickled somewhere, but it's going to be subtle and elegant. I know that's a long look how long, 11 minutes to try to get that all out of my mouth for clean crafting. And that's why I find it so hard to do. And that's the Maggie style. I showed you Lou David's is the other style, Kathy's is the other style. Now, my friend Cruz made this. And this is an example of clean Maggie crafting. It's a bottle cap, one image. Notice it's not like distressed, it's just the image punched out of the paper pad. And then it's these sort of traditional Maggie Holmes colors on Maggie Holmes paper, coordinated perfectly. There's nothing extra blingy about it. Now, Cruz actually defies categorization, just like Susantootsietucker and Craftymichelle. So this is a rarity. But it's a great example of clean crafting. So I thought I would share it with you. I know it gets complicated. Oh, it's going to get even more complicated. All right, let's try now Shabby, because this is the hard one. Because within Shabby, there are so many types. There is Scrapdaworld type of Shabby Chic, which has a bit more of a clean crafting style to it. So it's still shabby. It's going to have lace. It's going to have gessoing. It's going to have some distressing, but it's going to be a bit more restrained. That's one style of shabby. Well, what about someone like Donna Dreams times 3? How do you describe her? Well, she invented this incredible stick pin holder. Take a look at it, Cynthia. Look at this. Do you see all the lace work? Okay. Look at that. Something about Donna's work that makes her, and it's always like a signature. She hand dyes her seam binding herself. Her pieces always have, even the book she made me was magical. It's all like hand dyed. Everything has her personal touch on it. Lace is a key element of shabby. The other thing that's a key element of any kind of shabby is mint green, is like mint green and pink. A soft pink and a soft mint green is a very common color choice, a common color palette. Off-white, white, ivory. Distressing is part of that if it's that style, but Donna's is not a distress style shabby. Hers is definitely the lacy seam binding shabby. I know this is very confusing. The shabby is the hardest one to explain to you because, oh boy, there's so many different types of shabby makers. Remember this beautiful box my friend Jellybean made for me? Well, she's a different kind of shabby even than Donna. Now they have some things in common. They do. They have definitely a love for good lace. They have in common. But Jellybean doesn't use seam binding half as often as Donna. Not half as often. No. And Jellybean often makes everything, but what they do have in common is everything has their hand in it. So nothing is the way it came. That's what you need to know about shabby. I just figured out how to explain it to you. And vintage is like this, but not as much as shabby. All right, clean crafting. It's like the paper and the products, the way they came, put together beautifully. Maybe stickled a bit, but put together pretty much au naturel, but well coordinated and designed. Okay. Shabby makers have their hand in everything. Nothing is as it arrived to them. So Donna will take undyed binding and dye it herself and distress it herself. Jellybean will take anything you give her and change it. So, if they buy flowers, even if they're glistened up, no, they're going to do more to it. They're going to alter it. They're going to glass it up. They're going to stickle it. They're going to glitter it. They're going to add in special elements. There's going to always be a ton of elements. So notice in this piece, there's in here, there's meshing, there's thread, there's sprigs, there's flowers. In fact, there's 5 kinds of flowers. There's pearls. That's often a key to both vintage and shabby. Again, though, notice, even she made this for me, so Tiffany blue is dominant, but normally it wouldn't be. Jellybean's favorite color is purple. But there's lots of pink, lots of ivory, soft pink pearls, very common to shabby. But notice everything has her personal hand on it. Every inch of this has been altered in some way. And it has that sort of feel of very feminine, but almost older. Not older vintage style older. More like pearls and lace. That's the best way to help you start to understand it. But now I'm going to confuse you a bit. And I will tell you why. What about someone like Wandysweets? Well, she's shabby. She's 99.9% shabby. Look at this stunning shabby card. See again, everything is altered. Diamond dust on the flowers, right? Stunning. The frame is distressed and gessoed. The pearls are being glued in. These have been sprayed with either white paint or snow. There's cheesecloth poking out from behind. There's sewn pieces. There are sprigs coming out. There's got to be 20 elements on this card. There's nothing clean about this card. There's 20 elements at least. It's unbelievable. It's one of my favorite cards of all time. So, okay, that's her card, right? So she's shabby 99% of the time. Let me show you the mem deck she made for me. Now, it has a little concession to shabby. The yellow flowers. Again, how she's a shabby maker, she just couldn't leave it alone. She had to alter up. So even the bees that she's added and the sprigs have been slightly altered. But see, Wandy, or her name is actually Wanda, likes a little quirk too. That's her other 1%. Remember, she's the person I learned about the Vera girls from. So she always, sometimes she combines the two. And that's where it gets confusing. Because here we have the girls propped forward. This is really dimensional. But there's all of her concessions to the shabby. So, very different style of shabby. But it still speaks to her style. Now you're starting to see where it gets confusing. And it's about to get more confusing. Where's Miss Debhendrick's card so I can show you? I pulled out so many pieces as examples because I think that's all on dreams. Let's just show you this. Okay, so the same person who made the shoe, this is her mem decks, and for her ATC, one of them. And this is so shabby. When I think shabby, I think of this. Okay, I don't even know how many types of lace. There's got to be 4 or 5 just on this one little card. Diamond glass on the flowers. Pearls, little teeny pearls everywhere. Plus the girl, notice again, pink, green, off-white. Key colors in the shabby palette. So there's an example. Seam binding again always gives it away. All right, let's take another look at some other styles. Watlizziepresents, otherwise known as Lizzie. Okay, now Lizzie, like me, shifts lanes. She does some vintage, she does some shabby. And this is what I call put some bling on it. Or, as other people call it, girly girl crafting. That's not clean crafting. That's not shabby. That's not Maggie clean. And it's not vintage. It's its own category. So, it doesn't always have this much bling, but it often has quite a bit of bling. Very girly girl crafting. Now, but that's not Lizzie's only style, but this is a great example to show you of girly girl crafting. You can't miss it, right? It clearly is very girly girl. Okay, so there's another category. Well, what about Divian's mem decks? What about this one? What is this? See, Christmas, it gets a bit confusing because the clean crafters start to mess a little bit with stuff in a way that they don't normally. This is sort of clean meets shabby. And it's shabby paper, and it has a lot of Divian's hand in it. And I mean a lot. Like it's been altered and stickled and glittered and snowed up, and it's so beautiful, actually. It is so beautiful. But because it's Christmas crafting around Christmas time, you could argue that this is either shabby chic, which is that cleaner side of shabby, or it could have been clean crafting because there aren't that many elements in it. So this is what I mean, Cynthia. It's complicated. Even within shabby, if you go to look at, there's all these different types of shabby makers on YouTube, and they're all really different. What they seem to all have in common, like Marilyn Sweetwatercards, a love of lace, a love of frames that have a lot of detailing, pearls, mint green again, and pink, very shabby elements. But then there are some that love lace, a lot of lace, like Debhendrick loves lace. And she loves that bridal lace that dangles. I like it too. But she really likes it. Like, that's a different style of shabby. So, like, a lot of lace is one style of shabby. Jellybean style is another. Donna's is another. Wandysweets is another. And then there's Scrapdaworld. So, like, that's like 4 or 5 different kinds of shabby just within shabby. And I don't even think I covered them all. Because I can think of 2 other shabby makers on YouTube that are even different from that. But I don't want to complicate it any further for you. It's complicated. It's complicated. I think vintage is the easiest one to explain to you. And I've got several good examples, actually. So first of all, you've seen a lot of vintage because I've been doing it lately, right? When I do the stationery box, I do vintage crafting for that. So you've seen me do a lot of vintage projects. For vintage, you'll see a lot of images like this used, older images. I mean, this could be heritage from Maggie Holmes too. Again, that's where it gets confusing, but you'll see older images. This could be, depending on how it's used, this could be shabby or vintage. That's actually why I have them, because it can go both ways. I can change it so it can be one or the other. This is classified as vintage, but it could also be made to be shabby. But this, by Miss Judy, is a beautiful example of vintage crafting. The paper is vintage. Often with vintage crafting, there's like a staining. Miss Judy does do that throughout part of the book, but not all of it, because she's like on the cleaner side of vintage when she does vintage. But you'll see, look at this. There's the vintage lace. There's the distressed pieces of lace up here. This lace, there's a beautiful lace rosette behind, and it's an older style. There is the trim with some pearl. There's the element of the butterfly. When you go inside, it continues. Like, you can see this. It's such a beautiful example of vintage crafting, actually. It's just such a beautiful book. But you can see that there's some crossover between the vintage and the shabby. There's lots of things in common depending upon the maker's style, right? So vintage often has these sort of browns. Think like aged, so stained coffee paper, tea stained paper, things that look old. Vintage, things that look old. That's one of the best ways to describe it. And it certainly does have some crossover with shabby. Also, a lot of vintage makers do like to put their hands in everything. Miss Judy when she does vintage crafting, which she does so beautifully, is on the much cleaner side of vintage. But I'll give you now an easy way to look at this. Here are two exact digital prints. They're exactly the same except for one element. They are dictionary sentiments. Okay. This one's considered vintage because it's just on its own. So if I cut these out, I'm going to decal them and distress the edges. I'm going to stain them. They're going to be vintage. This one is shabby. Why? These. And I maybe would do them very differently. So on the vintage ones, I might do it in Vintage Photo by Tim Holtz. If I stain these, I might mix that with pink, like the pink Distress Oxide. So how you handle the materials and the colors you use can take the exact same thing and radically alter it by style. Okay, that's one way of explaining it to you. Let's look at a couple of more pieces that will either confuse you altogether or not, and then I'll have to sort of wrap it up there. And Miss Sahringmoore, Miss Ebony, is a clean crafter. And she's a beautiful clean crafter. She does beautiful clean cards. This is an example of her clean crafting. She used Maggie paper because she knows I love it. But she doesn't often use Maggie paper. She often does a lot of stamping. She makes these elegant, gorgeous cards. Her crafts are very elegant. But again, notice one element, a bow, and this little sentiment that just says for you. It's really just a tag to tell me it's for me as a gift. That's it. She's very clean. If I made this and I have this die, thanks to her, and I use it, mine looks very different. Even if I'm just doing Maggie crafting and not vintage or shabby, it's got a whole bunch of elements, like 15. So that's the difference. She puts one well-chosen one, and I would have like 10. All right. So what about people like, oh, there's Miss Debhendrick's card. I can show you one more shabby. I knew I pulled it out because I want to show you a different style of shabby. Miss Hendrick loves certain kinds of lace, and she loves butterflies. And she also is very different than Jellybean and Donna. She loves very detailed. I mean, look at how beautifully detailed this is. Y'all, look at it. She loves, she made that amazing mirror. She loves very detailed filigree. She's a filigree shabby. A filigree lace, and she also likes bling. She likes bling too, which Jellybean uses bling very judiciously. Miss Debhendrick loves bling. So you see, again, in shabby, there's all these differences. Okay. Now, what about people like Susantootsietucker or Craftymichelle? Well, I don't know what we call them, folks, because they do everything well. And that's the truth. They mix and match, and they really define categorization. In my head, I have invented a category for them called Artful Makers. That's what I call them. And I am in love with Craftymichelle's creations, and she knows that. I hope she knows that now. I'm a huge fan of her artistic style. I think she's so talented. I knew that she was a professionally trained artist before I was told that formally, just because of her work. Do you see this? She mixes everything, but mostly it's artful, and that's the truth. So I don't know what you would call her or how she self-identifies, but I call her an artful crafter. That's what I aspire to be. I'd say the same for Tootsie Tucker. She's an artful crafter. She makes beautiful clean cards. Like really. And Craftymichelle makes the most gorgeous cards on the face of the planet. But they're artful. Miss Susantootsietucker can make a clean card as well as she can make a hat. She can make a shadow box. Her Bone series, Miss Aguilar, you want to be really amazed? Go look at Susantootsietucker's shadow box series about Mr. Bones, which we all fell madly in love with. I think that people like Craftymichelle and and Susantootsietucker really defy categorization. They don't fit in any, because they let their impulse and their muse guide them, and so wherever they land, they land. I probably didn't make this very, very clear, because it isn't clear for any of us. The truth is that there are some things that you just look at, like if you look at this, you know it's shabby. You just do. It's all the lace, it's all the colors, you just know. You don't know what kind of shabby always, but you know it's shabby. In the same way that if I look at, let's say, I knew it was your Soleil. See, Soleil is another one that defies categorization. Let me show you. This is her beautiful, beautiful, clean crafting Memdex. This is Soleil, folks, Enchanted by Craft. But you've all seen the book she's made me, and you have seen her recent treasure book, which is junk journaling, and that's vintage crafting. Soleil shifts lanes, and what's really wonderful about her aesthetic is she mixes it together. Like, in a way I try to, but Soleil's successful at it. She mixes vintage successfully with Maggie and modern. And she's not just limited to Maggie. When I first met her, she did a lot of Maggie. Oh, but she runs in every lane. She's excited by anything. She loves anything artistic. So this is a great example of gorgeous clean crafting. But Soleil is not just a clean crafter. Now let's talk about Absolutelyalice. Okay, do y'all remember this gorgeous clean crafted box of amazing she made me? Oh, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. When you want to talk about brilliant examples of clean crafting, amazing. Just amazing. This is an example of impeccable clean crafting. This is like Elisha Love Letter generation. Those two, and Tennille, those three. Oof. Maggie crafting clean, they can knock it out of the park every time. Every time. If you love Maggie Holmes, there is no way you're not in love with those three ladies and their work. And Aura. And Lily. But here's the thing about Alice. She also can do other styles, and she does. And like Soleil, she can successfully mix vintage and Maggie and all heart and all of that together. She can successfully mix vintage and modern. And so she also defies a category, really, because of that. So I'm afraid this 32-minute video might be more confusing than helpful. And that's why I realized when I started answering it, how the heck am I going to explain this? You know? If you go and you look again at Kathy's cards from last night, which I was going to pull out again just to show you. Those are, or the cards from last night for the angels, Cynthia. Those are beautiful examples of clean crafting. But that's one style. This is another. The entry that you submitted for my challenge, your ATC, was clean mermaid crafting, and it was beautiful. But that was just that entry. That doesn't mean you're a clean crafter. Maybe you don't know what you are yet. And Dawn is going through something really interesting. DawnHcreates. So she was saying that she's changing her making style. And I said yesterday, no, you're not. You're just expanding. And I think that that's true for many of us. When I first started, I wanted to just be this. And clearly we all know now I will never be this. Right? I just can't do it. It's the one kind of crafting I can't do. I can't put one piece of ephemera on something like Craftykimchi and Elisha. I want to. Do you know how much I love Elisha and Craftykimchi's creations? Do you know I have them up everywhere? And Lily's. I want to be able to do it. I can't. I honestly can't. When I work on my gifts for them, it's like I feel like I'm mailing them pieces that are unfinished. Because that's how I'm working on something right now for Katzelcreate, and I swear I have to sit on my hands because I keep looking at it thinking it's boring, it's boring, it's boring, it's boring. Because to me, one or two pieces is unfinished. What? And I'm going to say this too. Okay, This is how I knew I wasn't a clean crafter, even though I love clean crafting. I feel that if I haven't done something to it, I haven't worked hard enough. That's what happens to me as a maker. If I haven't gessoed and speckled and altered and put my hand in it, then I feel like, have I not worked hard enough? Like, it's not even just that it's unfinished. I want to give as much of my artistic self as I can when I make something. And I didn't realize how hard clean crafting was until I tried to do that without adding 20 things. For me, it's really hard. It's not just that you can't hide anything. It's that you only get 1 or 2 pieces to be your whole self with it. That's really hard for me. I love shabby and vintage and mixing it with modern because I get to express myself in many different ways on one piece. But when you ask me to limit like this to 1 or 2 well-chosen elements, oh no. And it freaks me out. It really does freak me out. Making for my clean crafting friends is extremely stressful because I feel like I'm just never going to do a good job at it in the way that they do. When I look at an Elisha Love Letter Generation project or an Ephemeris project, Anna Silva, or I look at Tennille's projects, or I look at Ara or Lily's projects, they're just so beautiful. And Craftykimchi, and I'm never going to be that good at choosing one piece. It's just not who I am. So I don't know if I've confused you or answered your question, but at least you got to see a bunch of beautiful creations. I'll be really interested to see what those of you who I identified, how you feel. I mean, Lou, do you see yourself as a clean crafter? I see you as a clean crafter, but how do you see yourself? And Jellybean, Donna, Debhendrick, Marilyn Sweetwatercards, Wandysweets, how would you define yourself as shabby? Because for me, you're all in different categories. You're all shabby, but you're a different type of shabby. And Susantootsietucker and Michelle, Craftymichelle, what do you think about the fact that I think that you define categorization? How do you feel about that? In my mind, you guys are just artful makers. Just artful makers. The thing I want to be when I grow up. I hope that's helpful. All right, y'all. I'm ending this here, and I'm like dying to see your comments. Take real good care. Bye for now. And Cynthia, thank you for asking this question. Thank you. And I know, even though it was tough for me to answer, thank you. Bye for now, y'all.